I think I'm talking to a specific subset of people in my work. And is what I'm most interested in truly this specific or not? Is it this prescriptive and literal or not? Or is it that I want to make something that I find beautiful?
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. I am the host and creator, RNS, and this week's episode is part 2 of my conversation with artist Sarah Jamison. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, please listen to last week's episode, as this part is a direct continuation of the conversation. Thank you very much. Inspired by a range of different sources, her work serves as a personal analysis of contemporary culture and way in which we communicate with one another. I was like, there's kind of like a vaporwave aesthetic, or at least some kind of like early 2000s computer aesthetic to your work. Like, is that intentional?
It wasn't. And the first time I did a piece, and someone who's also an artist that is also a gallerist that I respect a lot was kind of like, whoa, it's like vaporwave. And I was like, what's that? And so for someone who's sort of self-proclaimed on the internet, I was like, I should know this better than I do. But I don't disagree at all. Like, it's not something that I'm actively like looking at vaporwave images, but I am having no problem being lumped in with that, because I think part of when you look in hindsight, there's so many things you can see affecting your work. But, I'm on the first generation of people. Like, I remember the time before our family had any sort of computer or internet, or having the cell phone, an early internet, or I remember sitting watching like the Windows 98 screensavers where you're like going through the maze, and I still sort of have that feeling of like that's the access point to this weird digital world. I don't know if it's like deeply buried memories of when these things had commercials and it's like the World Wide Web, and there'd kind of be like a vortexy thing, and there's like dudes on skateboards and phones flying by. And so I don't know if it's something that I'm pulling from that, or like I can now think of like, times where I'm like, wow, I'm seeing the distinction of like my friends who have a 14-year-old child and their internet usage and access, and like their meme world. And even I have nieces now. I have nieces that are older, in their 20s from my husband's side of the family. My sisters are young, 6 and under. And even seeing them access this internet world, there's old internet and new internet, and internet I'm on that if they knew it was a 35-year-old person, they'd be like, yuck, you don't go here. That's not who goes here. So it's kind of keeping all of that in mind. And even when I was recruiting for the art school, talking to those young students, and at the time I'm like in my early 20s, but sort of that distinction in the art they were bringing to me that I'd be reviewing, and the internet interfacing with them. It's, to me, something that's sort of just ingrained, inbuilt experience of just the age I am and the experience I have. So I'd say, yeah, that's all built in. It's not the wrong word. It's not a word I operate with, but I don't turn from it, because I think it gets lumped in there just as well as other places too.
So I wanted to ask you a bit about your Genuine Fake series. Kind of like, because what I realized that there was no like description for it. And I was just curious about the series. Like, what was kind of like the impetus of the series, and like how does it differ from your other work?
So that was really the series, and I talked a bit about sort of receiving the world's critique from the pieces that were iPhone screen sized. And so the impetus for that was, and we've kind of touched on it in a way, trying to be very considerate about, at the point that I finished that first series, I had like 52 drawings, and I felt done with it. I had had 2 exhibitions specifically with those works. And I'm like, how do I continue to push this in a way that's meaningful, and interesting? And I'm kind of tired of, trying to put these together, and just, in several different places, sort of receiving the critique or feedback. I would be in different programs that maybe like community galleries in DC would offer like feedback and critiques. So it just felt like on many levels the right time to depart from that. And so, it was maybe the first series of work that I made where I was feeling like, okay, I'm wanting to sort of address the topics that we're still working with and working with now, still using some internet imagery, breaking free though of being quite meme specific. And you can see some of the pieces that I
Of course,
still
yeah.
have back here. Where I may be more focused on aesthetics and I'm pulling from the internet in a broader way where, all of these are images that interest me or I've collected or that are coming. I try to pull from like royalty free sites so the images can belong to no one. So that was more so what it was. And it's that notion of kind of, again, like authentic experience where it's like it's genuine fake. It's sort of antithetical. It sort of doesn't exist. It's can it truly be authentic? Can it be real? Is it real? Do we? And this one maybe was more maybe specifically tethered to culture in a way that, the ones I'm making now are maybe even more nebulous. But there's this one that's sort of about like end of world scenarios, or this one was about kind of, I had listened to a podcast and I'm off the cuff not going to be able to tell you the name of the person, but it was about whether or not we're in a simulation, sort of simulation theory. Or you can't see this one very well, but it has the imagery from like the Voyager spacecraft. And it's sort of this notion that, there's like the gold discs that we sent into space and we're including, like Johnny Be Good and bird sounds and hello from the children of planet Earth. When if you're down here, that's not what it's like. People are huge assholes to each other and they're beautiful too. It's wonderful. It's perfect. But, the sort of genuine message, it's sort of like a fake reality. It's a greatest hits list of what we're up to down here. And so kind of, the work that I'm making now grows directly out of that. But again, it's like, what is true and real? What is world ending? What is, what is truly culture? Maybe that's the best way to put it. If aliens landed, they'd probably learn more on Reddit than they would going to like the Met or perhaps like Tate or something like that. It would be a more appropriate and earnest and honest look, I think, maybe than what we might like to think, than sending the like hello from planet Earth and here's the bird sounds and here's Beethoven's symphony and here's this and that, when like that all of that is true, but it's not reality. That idea of like truth and reality, genuineness, and the curated sort of way we like to present ourselves and the news that we access and how we share it and what we think about it and how we agree on the experience of something was really important to me in that work and continues to be. The work I'm making now, I think of as the same of that, honestly, but the big difference is these are just works on paper. And now I've really taken to like mounting the paper to board. And that was another, I was working with a gallery in LA and we were talking about how work is perceived and how, colored pencil is a bit of a niche medium. And in some ways, it's a bit of a redheaded stepchild. Not totally, but, and how framing work and then how sort of painted oil pieces on panel, how collectors, there's something to it, right? That, and he was saying he didn't really know what it was, but once it's sort of on a panel, it changes. And this is one of the works in progress. How it's sort of seen, how collectors feel about it. And so I thought, okay, that's fascinating. I'm going to give it a try. I'm not framing any more of my works. I'm putting them on board and seeing how that changes things. And I think it's a hot tip.
I think it's because it becomes an object, not a piece of paper.
Right.
If
Well,
it,
it's not, please.
yeah, no, but I say because if it's off the wall,
Mhm.
it's kind of it changes your opinion of like it's not just a piece of paper; it's an object. It exists. It's physical. Whereas in like even though obviously it's a print, or it's a piece of paper, it's a piece of paper, but still technically an art object. But it's I don't know, it becomes more of a form, I guess, than
Mhm.
just a piece of art. If that makes
Sure.
sense.
I do think that that's absolutely part of it. And it sort of then is cosplaying a bit as an oil painting. It's
Hmm.
maybe less stuffy than a piece behind glass, or I mean, it's never glass now. It's like whatever.
It's like
Plastic.
perspex. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and some of the books I'll be reading too are about, I love Leonard Mlodinow, and a lot of his books are, they're science books, but it's about, one is like The Drunkard's Walk, or one's about the subconscious brain, and how there's so many levels we operate on that are unknown to us, um, but that really affect our decision making. I think it's that in practice. That's a very small example, but how you perceive something can be changed by such a small difference, right? Whether it's in a frame or whether it's on a board and how it's on, or the language you use around the work. There's something to floral language that makes people, more engaged. And there's all these little things, factors to think about and how we experience the world. And so I don't know. That's one in practice, though. That was, like I said, a good tip out of a gallerist that you're always learning, you're always changing it, and I think there's little things like that along the way that are important. So colored pencil people, put it on boards.
I actually have a lot of friends who use colored pencil, and a
Mhm.
lot of friends who create really detailed work. And actually, that's a question I wanted to ask you that I didn't actually ask you. But like because you create detailed work, like how do you make sure that the viewer understands how much effort goes into what you're creating? And how do you kind of capture the amount of detail? 'Cause I feel like that's something that I've had a lot of conversations with different artists that find it really hard to actually translate the kind of the amount of detail in the work to the viewer or just online or just in general.
I do think this is where internet era has helped, putting the full process videos. People can really say like, whoa, like that's a lot of detail. But there's a level to that I think there is no explaining. You're asking people to sit in your shoes where you're working 8 hours a day for a month on something. There's just no forcing anyone to that. But it's hard because, and I love artist to artist. I would love an open dialogue about pricing work. Um, because it's like if I were to really charge hourly, it probably would be, you couldn't, like
Mm.
if I was to take what people would agree on was a livable wage to hourly, and I think probably a lot of artists spend a lot of time making their work detailed or not, I don't know that it translates into affordability for most. Um, so sometimes price can be the way, although you're sort of sacrificing on the artist end often. I think if your process takes a long time, you're never pricing to hourly wage,
Mm.
sadly. um but I do think like the videoing of process goes a long way in people sort of understanding what it takes to complete that. And if anyone is a devoted follower, which I don't know that anyone necessarily has many, including myself, but they'll see that the videos have been popping up for a month of working on it. But for myself, it's like sometimes you'll get all throughout life in art school, it's like, well, if you want to, be hyper realistic or realistic, why not just take a picture? And it's like, that's like a totally fair question. But it's also, how can I say I don't choose it? Like I sometimes will try for fun to make little abstract pieces, and I really hate them and I don't think they look good. And I wish I could do it any other way. It's not like I'm sitting down to say like I'm of course I want to do this and I want to do it well, but it's like it's just what I'm doing. I can't do it another way. I think anything else I make is just hot trash if it's not this. and so it's almost nothing I can do about it. I don't feel good about rushing it. I mean, all the time, my husband's sometimes like, you can maybe cut a corner or two, or like, you don't, when I edit the work digitally, that's another part of the unseen labor. I scan it or photograph it. It's in Photoshop, I'm color correcting, I'm editing, and I'm doing it, zoomed into 1000% or whatever. But I'm like, it's the only, if I sell it, it's the only way that I have this piece. I need it to be a very clean copy, and I need to maybe make prints of it. But ultimately, I need it because it's to be perfect, because that's what's screaming in my head. There's nothing I can do about that. It's just the channel I'm set on. I don't know. It's all I can do. It's all I must do. I must do it. I have to do it. I can't say anything more than that.
So, as somebody who creates work that is realistic, what is your kind of like, I guess, opinion / what is your response to like when people say, like hyper real or realistic work is just, it's just good skill. Like, are they just doing a show off because they're skilled? Like, what is your response to that?
It's like, yeah, yeah, you're right. Yep. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's not wrong. And I think when I say that, it could be perceived as like, I don't care, or I don't have a statement to say, because I do. But I think my life, how can I even say this? You cannot control. You simply can't control what others think. If you think my work is dumb, or I hope you don't, but if you think my work is, it's just, what's the point of rendering in this way? Like, what can I say to you? Yeah. Then go find the art you like, I don't know. Because you can't be for everyone. You just can't. And I'm not doing it. I mean, it sounds silly to be like, I'm not doing it for you, because the royal you is, I need you, I need you to love my work. I need you to make my living on my passion. I need you to love what I do as I love what I do. But I also do it because it's inside of me and it has to come out, and there's nothing I can do about it. In some way, I'm just this vehicle to the drive of, I mean, it sounds so overwrought. Maybe it is. But I cannot do that. It's the same way. It's like, do you ever listen to music and you're like, I don't get it?
Yeah.
I can say Future, I don't get it. It came out and I still don't know that I get it. Not to say I don't like some of Future's songs, but I'm like, mumble rap, maybe not for me. And then I keep moving to what I do like. And I don't think Future is sitting around like, damn, Sarah Jamison doesn't get what I do. Not at all. He doesn't, of course, he's in a pay grade far above mine, but all that to say, it's like, if you spend all your time being like, why don't they get me? What can I do to make them get it? There's not, and it doesn't matter what you're doing. I can't make other people think or be or wish them into the existence I wish they were, in the same way no one can make me do that for them. And I can only hope that those who love it. And in the same way that I love what I love, and you and anyone else, it's like the happiness and joy and reason for doing it cannot be dictated by, it's critiqued by, that I'm listening to what all are saying, but I don't put all of it in my pocket to keep going. And if it's hyper real work or realism work, I feel like it's sort of like hyper real. It sounds grandiose to put that on yourself. I don't know. That's one other people have to give to you, but then they like something. It's just not what I do, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to consider it. Just because when I talk to a lot of artists, especially, they say, hyper real work is very like, and I've definitely said it myself in the past, and in some ways I still think it. Like, a lot of hyper real work is very much about like the kind of the ability to be able to do it, and it can seem a bit showy at times, I think, depending on the person and depending on what they're depicting. But at the same time, like, there's a reason that exists, the same way that an abstract piece of work exists. There is a reason behind it. even if it is just because you can and because you have that skill.
Yeah. Yeah, it's inside of me. I couldn't do it another way if I tried. And I do think of things where it's like maybe in some ways I do want to push into abstraction. You know, the backgrounds, I think I'm sort of departing from plain black,
Yeah.
pushing more into like, I hate to do this because the quality is probably terrible, but like a very abstract and shiny and nothing
Yeah.
really background. So there are ways, but it makes sense to me. It may not make sense to everyone.
Because the backgrounds remind me of like computer screensavers.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
funny because you were back to saying about the 90s screensaver.
yeah,
That's what your work reminded me of. Like the backgrounds in a lot of your works remind me of like screensavers.
yeah. Or the one where the stars were just coming at
Yeah,
you. That was
yeah.
one of my all-time fave Windows 98s. So I don't know if all that's just in me and I'm just living out like a weird 1998 dreamscape of staring at a computer that's idle. It could
Yeah.
be. I don't know. My motivations.
So at what point did you discover colored pencils as your preferred medium? Because as you said, it's quite niche.
Mhm. Probably in college. There was a time where I thought I was enjoying painting, but I don't. I really don't. It's too much process, like mixing the colors and it dries, or if it's oil, it's staying wet forever and you're needing to glaze and all of these steps. And by the time I was in college, kind of experimenting around and in all seriousness, giving colored pencils a try. And there was a fellow artist. We were both kind of, his name was Chris, his name is, not was, he's still around, Christopher Canetto. He's not really working on colored pencil anymore, but both of us were kind of doing it. He was, sets but for me, it just really clicked. It's a high control media, something about that level of control I love. It takes nothing. You're not setting up. You're ready to go. The pencil's right here. It can be very analogous to painting and how you need to layer it. It can be complemented by painting. It can be quite unforgiving. There's something about that. It's maybe the crazy part of my brain where it's like high stakes. If you put the line down, you can't really get it back or go over it. You can, but it requires like scraping away the paper and you can get a super, super sharp tip. I mean, I think the essence of it is the high control. I really like having to have that much precision and control. Something about it feeds my brain in the right way. Once
Yeah,
I was onto it, I didn't stop.
because I'm very curious about like colored pencil in terms of like because it's not always the immediate choice of artists. You know, when you think of art, you think of like painting. It's kind of like the first thing you think of, I guess. But it's interesting because the more I think about it, the more that I've seen artists who use it, like the possibilities are like insane. And I feel like in some way it requires more skill than a paint. Like I mean, this may be controversial, but I feel like it requires more skill than painters. Because with painting, you can learn that anywhere.
I agree.
You can't just learn how to use colored pencils in that same way. The same kind of education is not available.
Mm. Yeah, it's like I said, there's no going over it. You can't paint over it. You have to stand on it or make it work. And I do think, I mean, it's a much more, sometimes I'm like, maybe painting's faster, maybe not. I don't know. Colored pencil's quite slow, but yeah, I'll stand on that too. Maybe it's harder than painting. It certainly requires a different, because there are things that I just like watercolor, forget about it. My brain doesn't work that way. I have no interest in learning because you almost have to my brain, it seems like you have to work backwards. But it's like what feels like there's that scene in Harry Potter where he gets his wand and it feels all warm in his hand and he's like, that's how I feel about it. You know, it's like I don't want to say that I didn't choose it because you do, but once I started doing it, it was like, yeah, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
I don't want to paint anymore ever. Unless it's something like a mural where I'm translating a drawing and it's like buckets of paint. But
yeah.
And I just, again, it's like you don't have to, there's no setup, there's no barriers, there's no time. you can do it. You can just sit down and do it. You can do it in front of the TV. You can do it on vacation. You can do it in the studio. There's no barrier. Yeah. Not that I've done it on a beach, but I could.
You
So
should.
yeah, maybe this might be the summer.
So I want to ask you about your work, about style. Like, do you think that you have a style? And is it important that people recognize your work?
I suppose there's a style. I mean, we were talking about like realism,
Hmm.
hyperrealism, maybe borrowing some from sort of surrealist tradition. And I suppose, I would love it if it was identifiable. I think that kind of plugs into a bit what we were talking about earlier, like how important is it to perhaps have like a motif that appears in all
Hmm.
pieces or something like that that makes you know without doubt, because ultimately I'm not the only one doing like highly rendered colored pencil pieces. There are plenty of realistic painters, or take your pick. Sometimes you're looking at photographs of something and you don't know if it's a Nan Golden or a Robert Mapplethorpe, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like there's and artists that I think it's like you can't always know without a doubt. But ideally I hope so, but that's another one that's like an out of control sort of factor. That you what you hope more, I suppose, is that you build a following for whom like your work is very important and they're specifically tuned into when you are bringing new work or where it's being exhibited, or if they're following what you're doing, or wanting to collect, whether it's at the level of an actual piece or if it's just a fun object like a pin or a print. Maybe that's sort of the more realistic and hopeful wish out of that.
So I want to ask you a bit about your creative process in terms of like, do you have any like routines that you use to help you kind of continue motivate you to create your art?
Um, I would say my studio is here in my house. That helps. If I'm not doing what I should be doing, I'm always reminded that I should be doing it.
Hmm.
But definitely, I mean, it's not always easy. And this year has been a tricky one for me. There has been a lot of stuff, like helping family members with surgery or
Hmm.
those sorts of things. A lot of that this year that sort of has derailed me in a way that I've leaned into and just sort of not questioning myself. And I think that's another good artist topic, but where I'm feeling like a bit adrift in some ways. That I've maybe leaned into more than I ought to. But, trying to have the perspective, of appreciating the things you have done and not worrying more than you can help about the things to come. And as far as, I mean, sometimes you're literally just making yourself like, go, get in there, go and do it. Something, trying to be in touch with things that are inspirational to me. And that it could be anything. I mean, there's many things that inspire me. One of the more sort of like random ones is I'm a big fan of professional wrestling, like WWE, AEW, Ring of Honor, like whatever you name it. And it's like a weird career. It's a very impossible dream to have, to want to be like a wrestler. And I think this is me projecting on them, but I imagine if you're like telling your aunts and uncles that you want to be a wrestler, they're like, oh, same way it's like, I'm going to be an artist. And they're like, yeah, great. Good luck. How are you going to make money? And and there's wrestlers in particular. So like couched within that, there's women's wrestling, which is sort of traditionally not taken as seriously as like the men's wrestling. And I'm a big fan of a lot of different wrestlers. My favorite is Mercedes Moné. So she's out of action right now, but there's several. Britt Baker. There's some. I won't wade into it. But anyway, when I see, and this is going to sound so crazy, but when I see them in matches and they're like beating the shit out of each other and they're landing on tacks and like they're doing something at, athletically at such a high level with such a small
Mm.
margin of error. I think that's it sounds crazy to say it. This is what I like about wrestling. You don't want anyone to get hurt, but at any minute you could probably die or be
Mm.
paralyzed, if you do it wrong. The margin of error is very thin. But it's also like a wonderful soap opera, and the solution's like always violence. And it's this niche thing that is very to do it at a high level. It's impossible. It's an impossible dream, really. So there's something within that I equate with like the quest for a successful art career. So I find it very inspiring, when I watch it, and particularly when I watch women gain equal footing and respect and athleticism as the men do. And so for me, that's very um inspirational and fulfilling. Or so sometimes it's getting in there and it's like listening to music that inspires me, or you just have to tell yourself to like shut up and do it. There's nothing to do except doing it. There's no answer, there's no third way. There's if I want it, and I say to myself, yes I do, so go to work. There's not You can give yourself grace sometimes, or it's like, you've been feeling bad, so you can just chill out today and read a book. But it's empty when the answer is I just have to stop wringing my hands about it, or wondering if what I'm doing is going to go where I want it to go, or if I'm doing enough, or doing too much, or if what I did was wrong or right. It's like it has to, easier said than done, but you just have to like stop and do it. That's it. There's no magic answer. It's just you have to do it.
So how do you avoid burning out?
I don't think you can. Sometimes you do have to because sometimes it's hard, and it's been a little bit that way this year for me, where I'm like, lightly questioning myself, or feeling dissatisfied, or feeling burnt out, or feeling like you pour everything into it, and it can be difficult not to take personally when maybe it's met with rejection, or it's met with, and it's not just one rejection, it's your 10th rejection from the opportunities you've applied to, or you just want to be noticed by X, Y, and Z place or person. And it's so hard to feel that way. I don't, it kind of came to a head lately, where I was like, feeling that way. And then I'm sort of talking, to my husband about it, and just having a good cry about it, and then being like, onwards and upwards. What can you do? You can feel the feelings you feel, but there has to be an end to it at some point. You can give yourself the grace and the space, but there has to, easier said than done. I mean, we're in July and I'm sort of behind on the amount of pieces I usually make. But with interruption, and then with giving myself the time to be like, but it's like, okay, then that's done. It's done now. I've done all the processing and hand wringing and like catharsis I need to do about it. And talking to my husband or my best friend or whoever, and being like, all right, and I did it. It's done. Onward. There's only onward. You can't, the answer is doing it. There's nothing. I get nothing that I want if I do nothing for what I want. That there's no secret, unfortunately.
No,
At least in my experience. I don't know. I'm waiting on maybe some like nice nepotism or something. I don't know. It could be sweet.
but they wouldn't though, because the good thing about you and the practice you've created and the life you've forged for yourself is that it's on your terms.
Yeah.
I think, it's always cool to look at people who have, say, like won the lottery and be like, oh, I'd love to be like that. But it's like, but you don't live life in your terms. Like, yeah, you might win the lottery, you might have a lot of money, but it's not on your terms. Like, yeah, you can spend it, but you didn't earn it. There is something very good about being able to kind of appreciate everything you have because what you've created for yourself. That's just my opinion.
No, I agree.
And life in general. I think it's also as you said earlier, it's about control. Like you can control. Like the only thing, ironically, the only thing you can't control is the finances, but you can control the work. It's like, and even in a sense, you can control that because you price your work. So in a sense, you have that kind of control there. Also, I guess you just can't control people buying it. But yeah, yeah, I think it's a tricky one just because there's an artist friend of mine that I have spoken to very recently, and he said that he hasn't really done anything for a while, and he's taking like a bit of time off, and it's the longest time he's been away from creating art. And I said to him, I said, go and live a little. I said, maybe what you need is to go and live because without life experiences, you're not going to have anything to create work about. You can't just create all the
Sure.
time. And I think that's kind of the big danger for a lot of artists is that you feel like you have to constantly be creating. And that's cool, but like, what are you going to do with everything you've created if you aren't taking a break and examining it and looking through it and trying to create opportunities for the work you've created? You can only create so much, I think.
It's true. And you do have to take the break. But I think you have to be prepared too. You have
Mm.
to be prepared to be burnt out a little. You have to be prepared to meet the deadlines. To me, I'm like, not getting it done is never an option. If there's a deadline, I'm meeting it.
Mm.
Period and full stop. But yeah, I mean, if it's what like this year, I have leaned in, like I said, to feeling a little, and it's been the thing I had to do. I guess I did it, so it's important. Step away when you need to. I say that. I don't like endorse full on hustle culture, but it's like,
I actually have a work
yeah.
colleague, and he said to me ages ago, and it's always stuck with me, and it's something that I reference, I think, in a couple of interviews now. But he said to me, there's always seasons of doing things. Like you might work, 60 hours for like 3 months, and then the next 3 months you might work, 16 hours because the money you've made in those
Mhm.
like 3 months is enough to sustain you. Like maybe considering things like that in terms of like everything, there's a season for everything. Like you might be doing a lot of work now, but then maybe in 5 months, you're not going to have to because it's different. It's all about your
Right.
circumstances and the
Right.
sliding scale of like what you need. Just something that's always stuck with me in terms of like the way I do things. Like I'm like, if I'm doing loads of too much work at once, I'm like, hey, cool, I'll take a break. I'll just do a little bit less. I'll turn that dial down a little bit for another month and then back up again to double the amount the month after. It's about like
Right.
being adaptable to the circumstances in which you're in as well. Um, just some
Absolutely.
random advice nobody ever asked for, as this is literally my life. Um,
Yeah, I think that's wise.
so you said that your process, and I don't know if this applies to your latest work, so correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your process starts off as digital and then it becomes
Mhm.
physical. Why is that?
Yes. Yeah. Because, and maybe this feeds into like the control perfectionism thing, but because essentially I create collages
Mm,
that become the drawings. And when I do that on Photoshop, I can move it until it's perfect, till it's exactly what I want. I can experiment with it, turn it on, turn it off. Layers I'm talking about there. And I have artist friends that just, they just put the pencil down on paper and like lean into the full process. And I would never want to do that. I want to know that I'm 1000% happy with the composition. Everything is as I want it, no doubts. Um, Before I begin. I don't want to find out halfway through. And part of it is the work I'm making is labor intensive. I don't want to
mm,
pour in a month to find out I think it's trash. I want to know exactly where I'm headed from the minute that I start a piece. And so I'm always collecting, images, keeping them in just like a inspo folder on the desktop, um, to be able to compose new work. So, what I make digitally becomes just the drawing reference, and I'm drawing. Usually I have like my iPad set up and I'm drawing off of that. Um, and then those don't really see the light of day. I mean, they don't look good. They're not like quality props, or sometimes I'm changing colors or elements anyway. Um, but they're instructive for me. And, I'm teaching, I mentioned earlier, like one class a week on drawing for adults. And I model it, they make real collages
mm,
to draw off of simply because I don't, they probably don't know Photoshop. But I find that they like that. It's a certain level of comfort. You know where you're headed. You've played with it. You're drawing something is interesting to you. You've self-selected all these images. You don't have to come up with anything per se. The image is a given, and maybe some of them are quite conceptual about it. Some of them are not. Some of it's purely an aesthetic arrangement. Um, More or less abstract, but it gives you all the same options without the inner turmoil of being like, do I put a raccoon there or is it a vacuum? Like you put it all on the paper and you're happy with it, whatever it is. So for me, I find it brings a lot of peace and certainty to the process of creating.
Do you ever show, or have you ever kind of, I guess, recorded you talking about like you actually like the pre-production of your work in terms of you're accumulating the images and how you specifically choose what image is going to go, or like composition? Have you ever actually like shared that?
No, I haven't.
Because I'd
And
be
I
really
guess,
curious just to see like how that works and like how your brain works when you come to look at images. Because I can see a bunch of random images, but you can see an image.
yeah. And it's sometimes I'll have an idea of what I want to create, but sometimes I don't. And I'm just tossing in
Hmm.
images that I like into Photoshop and just seeing. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I know what this is about. Like, I know what I want to say here, looking at where I'm combining things. I haven't ever considered that because sometimes, in some ways, it's the most private part,
Hmm.
maybe. And secondly, I don't know how I would necessarily share it.
Live stream it.
Um, yeah, that's true. I just like record the computer
Yeah,
screen.
live stream it, and just
Um,
kind of like have you going through
yeah,
options. It doesn't even have to be like oh, I'm going to live stream this. People can watch my process. It could literally just turn the camera on and forget it's there, and just go on with your
right.
process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe I ought to. I mean, it seems, and that's the other, I never know if it's like going to be me tooling around for an hour with like pictures of snakes and coins and nothing
Yeah.
happens, or if it's going to be something that turns into a drawing at some point.
But that's what's interesting though, is because as I always say to people, like it's always interesting to see the other different possibilities and the
Yeah.
failures, just as much as the final piece of work.
Yeah, true. And just, I think everyone's editing eye, is so different
Hmm.
in some ways. It'd be valuable, I guess, to see how people respond to it.
So I didn't actually add this question onto the list. I've just thought about it now when we're talking about it. But what is your opinion on AI art and like the kind of current trend of like Mid-Journey and
Everyone
that kind of fun stuff?
really up on it. And I understand the nuances of like, I mean, I don't know if art theft is too broad of a word, but like, they're pulling
Hmm.
without any sort of like agreement from artists. And I think, that's sort of a fundamentally wrong thing. But I sort of wonder if it's, and I hesitate to say this because I may be profoundly wrong, but it's almost the same thing as with, oh, why can't I think of the word? For a hot minute, everyone was like, are you going to make your art into
NFTs.
not gifts?
NFTs.
I'm sorry. Yeah, NFTs. And it's like everyone was so about that. And ultimately it's a nothing burger. I don't want to say it's nothing, but it's so over right now. And it's also so fraught with like people. I still see artist friends of mine who get their work ripped off for NFTs, but what's the marketplace remaining for it? I sort of wonder what's the marketplace for AI art? Like where, other than it maybe taking images from artists, which I find ethically wrong, and sort of the same thing is happening in music where you can use voices, like
Hmm.
I could make a Drake song, Drake doesn't agree.
Yeah, of
But
course.
I think they're kind of making uh, a way for that to be, if you end up using an artist's voice, some artists have made it so that you have to pay them.
Of course.
So maybe something like that's the answer. But I mean, I do wonder, like, who wants that AI art? We're all so scared, but like, where is the demand for it? It's weird that they can do it. It's wrong they can steal it. Where do we see it?
I think companies. So rather
Yeah.
than hiring an artist to create like a campaign or a photographer to shoot a campaign, they can just generate their own. I think it's more for like
Yeah.
people who can create stuff in-house rather than having to pay people to do it externally. That's what I see it being really the biggest problem.
Is it more applicable? Like, I've worked in places that are more office type and they're needing specific school branding, right? And it's got to be colors buff and blue. I can see where for them it's great. But I'm wondering, I'm like, do they though? Is it a net positive if it's found out by people that cool and cutting edge? Maybe it's Nike, maybe it's I don't know. But you find out that they're just like cosplaying art, cosplaying working with authenticity. I feel like generally that comes to bite people in the butt. People, consumers, I feel, and this is me as a real nobody in the world of knowing about marketing and advertising, but people want authenticity. People don't want to live in an AI hellscape, not really. So I just feel like we're at the beginning of this tech, and there's the worry that it infiltrates everything, and maybe it does. But I do think that people don't want really to have a meaningful advertising campaigns or art in a way that's just thrown together by a computer. I don't know. I could be very wrong. I don't think there's no place for it, but I don't know if it's going to be as apocalyptic and job stealing, because it's not different to me than when someone has an apartment to decorate, they can go to IKEA and they can buy prefab art, or they can go to Home Goods and they can buy prefab art. Or if they have the means, they're probably not going to do that necessarily. They're probably going to they're going to go to a craft fair, or they're going to go to an artist or a gallery, or they're at least going to buy a print of art, and they're not going to buy, it might even be Society 6 or something like that, but it's a grade above your big box choice.
Yeah.
So I think I personally see it landing more like that, but my knowledge on this is admittedly shallow. So who knows, maybe in 2 years, everyone will clip this video and laugh at it, and I'll be viral for being the dumbest artist alive. I don't know.
I don't think so. Somehow.
I hope not. I hope not.
No, somehow I don't think so.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to ask you about is color, because color plays quite a significant role in your work, and especially where you pair like vivid colors with like matte backgrounds to kind of draw the viewer's eye around. So like, what is your relationship with color like? And how do you figure out like suitable color schemes for each of your work?
I just love color. It's almost nothing more and nothing less. I love it. I love it. And I can't choose. And all my furniture is white, black, or gray, so I can have every color of book and wall art, because otherwise it would be too much. It's very maximalist of me. But I love neons. I love the grabbiness. I love the saturation of it. I love the joy of it. I just love color. I don't know.
Because what I was really interested in or really intrigued by is your use of like gold.
Yeah.
Like there's something about it that I looked at and I was like, this is just like, it looks so rich.
Yeah, I love gold. I love gold. Although I hate the color, and I've talked about this with artists before, and I preach the choir of like, it's the worst pigment to work with. It's the least blendable. It's the least opaque. It shows every flaw. It's incredibly thin. Any medium you work with, I'm a yellow hater as a technique. As a color, I love it. But so sometimes it's torturous when I'm like, oh, I got to do gold, but I love gold, so you have to do it. You have to use yellow. But it's rich. It's grabby. It's like, when you're young and you see, I love looking at pictures of like Varna gold. It was found on a site where it was just peeking out of the ground. It had worn away enough, and it just jumped out at the people who found it. Or, King Tut's burial mask, and it's just so shiny, so vivid, so alive, and almost tangible, like you could touch. there's just, it's such a rich sensory thing that I always want to lean all in on color. It's I don't know that it's color theory per se. You're always trying to choose things that go together or accent or complement one another, but really genuinely, I love color. I can't step away. It's too beautiful, too real, too rich.
So what would you say like the three colors that sum up your work?
Hot pink, uh, hot pink. Can I just say rainbow? Like bits
Yep.
of rainbow? Okay, bits of rainbow. And then maybe I'll say black. Even though it's not necessarily in there all the time, it's an indispensable color for making the other ones pop out.
So
Yeah,
do you ever worry about the repetition of ideas and imagery as you create more work?
all the time. It was funny when I read that question, I was like, oh my gosh, wow. It's like you were living in my head sometimes. But yeah, and that's why I'm like, oh, they're always different. Is that right or is that wrong? I do tend to, if I did have a repeating image, I find myself using sort of like busts, like ancient busts, a fair amount throughout, or maybe shards. I guess technically it's pottery. There's shards, not shards, but shards of pottery. I'm always sort of drawn to like the terracotta bits. So those repeat quite a bit. And maybe smaller motifs. I'm always sort of like little hearts or triangles. Sometimes I'll be putting into work, but yeah, I think about it a lot. Should I repeat? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea to have mostly not repeating? I haven't landed on an answer, but I do consider it all the time. Or I'm always worrying, oh, am I somehow doing something someone else has done? You just can't see every work that's out there. I don't want to ever, you want what you do to be iconic and unique and all of that. So that's always in my head too, where maybe it's more of a nightmare scenario where I wake up and I'm like, sometimes it looks like someone else's work, you know.
Hmm.
But so it's always on mine, I would say.
Because the thing about repetition is it can go two ways. It could either get really boring really quickly, or it can be used to create like a cohesive body of work and become
Mm-hmm.
like, recognizable when people will know it's, oh, this is a Sarah Jamison piece because it has a black matte background that looks like a 90s wallpaper,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep,
it's kind
yep.
of, it can go both ways because, you see artists all the time that create seemingly just the same image, like very literally just the same image over and over again.
Right. Yes.
And it sells very well, and it like Andy Warhol, for instance,
Yeah, yeah.
one could argue the same image over and over again, and it obviously it sells. But then it's
Right.
also, I guess, about the context behind it and the principle of the image. And like, for a lot of artists, repetition is the reason for their work. It's, maybe through
Mm-hmm.
repetition, you learn more skills and you get better at reaching your end goal, for instance. Um, but it's just a question I always like to ask people because I feel like nobody really talks about what they worry about in their work,
Yeah,
you know?
I want to hear all artists
So I
thoughts
feel like
on.
that's something I need to add more into my questions. What is your favorite piece of work you've created so far?
Hmm. I'm actually very, very proud. The piece isn't in here, it's with a collector, but it's the piece in the Genuine Fake series that has like the two mirrored play guns with uh, the smoke behind it is from the Challenger explosion. And then it's sort of got like graphic in the sense of like not explicit, but as a icon.
Like a graphic
Like
design?
little, yeah, yes, blood drops kind of, or it could be interpreted that way. But it was a piece where I was technically very proud of it. The mirroring thing is hard, and every time I do it, I swear I'll never do it again. And I also just felt very, very proud of, aesthetically and conceptually putting together something. It was sort of a meditation on like mass tragedy and sort of the virality of it and sort of the secondhand experience of it. From I don't know if the sentiment is correct to say like Challenger was viral. We don't want to say that, but it was like something that teachers brought. It was before my time, but teachers brought televisions in to watch, and this was something that was experienced in real time, and it was sort of epic and it's tragedy, and it was maybe among one of the early things that was sort of a broadcast tragedy. And, speaking as an American, like, we obviously have guns, shootings, all of that. And, I never necessarily want to be prescriptive in like my exact thoughts about it, but it's also like, what does it mean? How does it influence us? What is like, this one sentence essentially really in our Constitution, its effects and its ramifications, how it threads through our media and our social media, how, even when we don't experience something, everyone sort of has this very resolute idea and experience of, name your mass tragedy or shooting. It could be any of them. And not just shootings, but we'll say violence. So it was just a piece that I felt really proud of in totality.
That's interesting. And I think also the interesting thing about guns is that like it also forms the identity of America as well. Because obviously here in the UK, it's not something that is so much of an issue. Whereas in America, it's a huge issue for a lot of different reasons, across a lot of different spectrums as well. It's not just a case of you have guns, it's like, the laws and when to use them and how can you use them and should you use them and, and when are you right to use them, when you're not right to, it's just, it becomes like actually, in my opinion, just, as, a Brit, it becomes like a bit of a mess because, it's, because, there's like, then they kind of, to me from the outside, it also asks questions about, property and private land and public land and who owns what and, commodity of space and all that kind of thing. It opens up
list of our favorite things to fight about.
Yeah, it's like it kind of opens up like a larger dialogue of like just I'm about to say like no, I was gonna say what's wrong with America, but that's probably offensive, but like the potential problems of America through a person who is an American, who has never lived in that particular world. Because America seems like a very different place. It just feels like it's a different world entirely. And one day I will be over at some point in the future. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's cool here, but it's crazy here too,
Yeah, I don't dispute that, that's for sure. So, do you feel like you're part of a larger art community?
I do. It's like the DC specific. I'm in Washington, DC. Our scene is relatively small, but I think, when we touched on it super briefly, but, the larger art world that I'm in is digital. I have all these people that I think of as friends that I've never met in my life. But, we're often commenting on each other's things or, liking whatever, but, they're my peers and I am in exhibitions with them or, in some form or fashion communicating with them. So it feels very expansive and it feels very beautiful. And there's a artist that hit me up just today about, he's in South Texas and it's not necessarily a big arts community, but this idea and initiative he has and wanting to bring other artists into it. And so the answer to that is yes, that's the big gift of social media, I think.
So what are your thoughts on social media and how has it impacted your practice?
My overall thoughts on it, net positive. It impacts my practice. I try to be very diligent about documenting it, putting it on social media, and it's given me, I would say, for the most part, almost everything I've applied to in the last 5 years. And I think this is just, like full disclosure. I've pretty much been rejected from everything I've applied to for the past 5 years, maybe with one or two exceptions. And any opportunity that has come my way, I have kind of set the precondition for on social media. I think it's incredibly important to like be seen working, completing work, process. When you're not there in person, this is it. This is all people know of you. And so it's important to, I think of myself as who is dedicated, able to make deadlines. I'm a safe bet. I want to be in your gallery. That's what I want my Instagram to look like. And so when that's on there, and you're trying to be noticed or found or whatever the goal may be. So for me, it's been so crazy important. It's been the most valuable tool in my toolbox. Of course, nothing on there is like probably true real life, very healthy, easy to get like lost in a scrolling hole, but so valuable. I mean, I don't want to say a free tool because it's not free, but until there's something better, I'm like, I'll live and die on Instagram and TikTok too. I kind of cooled off on TikTok, but it's how else? There's no way you could be interfacing with galleries overseas, or for me, California is the other side of the country, without social media. So nothing but thankful for that in a lot of ways.
So what has creating art taught you about yourself?
Wow, that's a really hard question. Creating art, it's really the only time that I really am truly, I suppose, sitting with my thoughts and examining them in a way that is beyond the sort of momentary fleeting thought. It's taught me that you have to be resilient. You have to be able to take a critique, take a punch, and keep on moving. And that's not to say there's plenty of wonderful feedback you get, but it's that there's some sort of old saying, you hear the bad stuff twice as loud as nice stuff or whatever. But and it's definitely like, I know that I operate on I'm a very sort of like high anxiety perfectionist sort of person, high control, high all of that. So I think it's beneficial that there's an outlet for that. I think like it's a way to channel a certain level of like, I just think if you're an artist, it comes with a certain amount of like maybe mental distress. I don't know, anxiety or depression or these things. And in some ways it's like not great, but in some ways it's like a secret weapon. It's part of the chaotic like success recipe. So in some ways you can embrace things that are maybe, or reroute them in a way that's more positive through art making.
Yeah, because a lot of people use it as like therapy, or as like a way to process their thoughts and emotions, or to kind of question things that maybe they're feeling in their life,
Yeah.
or topics they want to understand more thoroughly. Because
Right.
art can always help you kind of like process things. And I think there's something that people might take for granted, or people just do all the time. It's kind of one of those. Like that. I was also meant to ask you a question before I asked that question. I realized after I didn't ask you, and I was like, of course. So because I was like the social media bit, I was like, let's just skip that because we don't need that. We can just go to the conclusion section. And I just thought actually there's a question I wanted to ask you. And you mentioned feedback, so it kind of reminded me. Because you said feedback, and I was like, oh, I'm going to ask you about that. So what kind of feedback do you like to get from your work online, and kind of what engagement is valuable to you?
Well, all engagement's good engagement for sure. There was one time I got this DM, some like Canadian high school teacher, I guess, had been showing work to their high school students. And this student had made work inspired by my work. And it was like Kylie Jenner with an egg. And it was like on a phone screen. It was like earlier on when I was doing the more phone, based work. But I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. I love that. Like, thank you. Like, that really made my day. I mean, it's not it didn't like, doesn't move your career forward per se, or like open any doors. But I was just like, damn, thank you. Like, that's cool. You're looking at it and you like it. And I love seeing that you made something that, sort of tangentially connects to mine. And it's in this like art world. Like maybe she'll go on to pursue it. I don't know what she's doing. We never interfaced after that, but it was just like, in a beautiful way of making the world smaller through art. I'm
Hmm.
like every like and say even comment, inane or not, is meaningful. It drives your algorithm. I love positive feedback, of course. But that was one that really sticks with me that I just was like, cool. That's cool.
I think, but it also reminds you that people are looking at your work, whether you think
Yeah,
they're not, whether think they are or not, because I feel like it's very easy to feel like nobody's paying attention.
yeah,
Because, just because you might have like the same, at this point in time, like same like 100 people comment on your work all the time, it's
mm,
hard to think or hard to realize that your work is actually being reached. Your work is reaching other people. It's just
yeah,
it's just not noticeable to you.
yeah,
So it's nice when somebody very random just turns up because if because the interesting thing about it is that if the one student is creating work based off your work, then the whole class is going to be looking at your work in some way or another.
yeah. And I hope, there's like the side that's like, great, I hope you all grow up one day to want to be art collectors. But more so than that, I'm like, I hope that you take from this like it was a very cute and silly drawing with Kylie
Mm.
Jenner and the egg, but I'm like, but I hope that you leave with, and this is when I teach the class too, like art is, it doesn't have to always be a highfalutin thing. It doesn't have to be like an emphasis on like, is it technically well rendered? Is it good? It can examine pop culture and be silly about it. And if that's what inspires you, and if the end of the day you're feeling bad and it helps you to like pull out a pencil and draw something silly from social media, I'm like, that's art and that's beautiful. And I hope that that's like a good part of your life,
Mm.
like it's just a little happy thing for you. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So yeah, that was one that probably always stick with me. I think I saved that picture somewhere on my phone, the Kylie Jenner egg drawing.
So I have a question for you from the last artist I interviewed, which is Melanie Herskind, an incredible artist. And she has two
Yeah.
questions for you. So the first
Okay.
question is, if you could sit at a table with any artist, who would it be?
I would probably say Artemisia Gentileschi. I believe I'm pronouncing her last name. I should be pronouncing it better because I've been studying Italian for a year and a half. Um, but it would probably be her, I would say. Fascinating Renaissance artist. A lot of tumult in her, I don't know if you know her story or
I don't
not,
know.
but um there was, at that time you're sort of apprenticing, and I think the guy she was apprenticing under sort of raped her, but it went to trial, which of course we're talking Renaissance times.
Hmm.
So, but I think that means she was essentially tortured under, but stayed true to all of that. But all of that aside, the work is incredible, well known. You probably would recognize, she has one of the more famous, like Judith and Holofernes or Holofernes paintings. I mean, fabulous technical work done by a woman in a time where that really wasn't something that was to be done. Um, and just an absolute classic of art history.
So me, I link to her work because I'd be really interested to see it.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely
yeah.
something I'm always interested. Like, and
You
also
would
Renan.
recognize
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
So the second question is probably going to be the same thing. Is if you can afford to buy any art piece in the world, what would you buy and why?
So I don't know if I have like one piece I've been salivating after. I I would say I would buy a piece from, I don't know if you know Jason Reebok.
No.
He's with like Library Street Collective, and it's abstract work, but it's really beautiful stuff. I mean, I think his background is in like street art and graffiti. Or what I would, if I truly just had money to throw around and like zero ethics, I would maybe like take like a, why am I like basically an artifact, right? I'd take like a mural wall out of a old like building of antiquity, like out of Pompeii, and install it, or like a mosaic floor or something like that. That would
Mm.
be, I mean, I don't know. I'm always kind of like, oh, those things don't belong in private collections, but something like that if I had all the money in the world.
I was gonna say, tell that to the British History Museum.
They don't have any compunctions about it, but
That's good.
Um,
They probably got the money to not have to worry, to be honest.
yeah, true. So something like that, or like an amazing old bronze, or maybe, if I'm gonna shout out, like, I would love to collect from, there is an artist, and you should totally check her, either of these two out, that I'll say. But her name is Colette Martin. Colete dot Martin is her Instagram. And I'm like, I could eat her paintings. They're so beautiful. I adore them. So like in my life, I want to buy one. And then I'll say a local person as well from the DMV, Michael A. Booker. I just adore his work also. It's kind of derived from quilting tradition, a lot of fine liner pen and texture and color buildup. So those are two folks who I would love. So those are my local picks, and I would say like an ancient artifact or Jason Reebok, a piece of his. Yeah.
Send me links to those artists. I'll definitely love to check them out. I always love checking out
Yeah.
new artists, so for sure send them. Particularly if they're local and they want to be
Yeah.
featured and they want to be interviewed, definitely send me
Yes.
them over. Or if anybody you know of or think of that might
Oh,
want to
I
be featured
will.
or interviewed, like send them over because I'm
For
always
sure.
interested in talking to people. I have a
Yes.
long queue, but I can stick them in the queue. It's fine. As long as I
Yeah.
don't mind waiting a couple of months, it's fine.
Adam, you'll get there. They're great. I don't know where Colette lives. She's an internet Instagram
Perfect.
from Michael is definitely in the DMV or in
Perfect.
DC. Yeah.
So I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, Brian Dean Howes, who I mentioned in pretty much every interview, and I sent you a link to his work because he creates these really interesting, huge, detailed biro and ink drawings.
Mm.
And we were talking ages ago about kind of which is more important, like the personality of the artist or the skill of the artist. So the question to you
Mm.
is which is more important, the skill of the artist or the personality of the artist?
I'm gonna have to kind of go 50-50 on that. Like there are some artists who can like be kind of mysterious and aloof, but I think you sort of have to operate at a high level of success already. Um, I do think your personality and sort of story count for a lot. Like people don't want to get anything from somebody that everyone agrees is like a total jerk or something. Um, Depending. I mean, of course, there's like an example to the contrary of everything. But I think it's important, I mean, not just as artists in general, but to be like a gracious, good person. But I think if in life, anywhere, it's like I'd rather be like street smart than book smart, maybe. You can
Hmm.
kind of get along a little better that way. So I think the same applies. Like you need to have the talent in whatever way it manifests. But if you are not, I don't know, like gracious and kind and open, and I don't know where it goes, maybe you could be a big jerk and do it, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to like hang out. It's such like art is such a like interpersonal sort of thing. There's so much sort of smooching and existing together and events and those sorts of things. You got to be able to be in the mix kind of at some level. Some people are introverts, some are extroverts,
Yeah.
but you got to be nice.
Do you think it's easy for you to show your personality through your work?
Mm, I'm trying. I mean, that's another one where I'm like, can I answer that? I look at my work and I'm like, there I am
Hmm.
on the page. Like that's everything I've poured into it. Um, but do other people who know me well, that's maybe a question for them.
Hmm.
If I would like to think so, but I mean, I think you could look at it and infer that I'm probably like a certain sort of person. But to me, yes. To others, you'd have to
Maybe.
ask. You could ask your next guest, maybe.
Okay.
um,
So what
uh,
does it mean to be a successful artist? And how do you measure the success of your own work?
yeah, success is defined so many different ways, and it's like you want the world, you want the moon, I want to be in a Whitney biennial like anybody else does, of course. To me, that's like, or something equivalent to that. That's sort of just the first sort of landmark thing that popped into my head. But of course you want that. But the odds of that are not great, and is, to me, success is like, I'm making a living on my work. I'm walking in my purpose. I, feel content with what I make and do. I've had the good fortune to do a lot of cool things and exhibit with, cool places and people. And I expect to continue to do that. And there are times where it hits me in ways large and small. Like I mentioned, I have young nieces, and there's been times where they'll just say something like, "Oh, like, yeah, and Auntie's an artist and in her studio," and where it's just, to them, like, there's no question there. They perceive it very as like, well, that's it. That's what she does. That's what you do. Where it almost like guts me, and I'm like, oh, like, it almost makes you want to cry. It's not, from on high where you're getting, Jerry Saltz being like, it's incredible. But it's when someone, unquestioningly accepts this and sees it as like, I don't know if they'll be artists or not, but it's at least like, there wasn't a lot of people I could look to in that way. And so it feels meaningful to be acknowledged in that way. Maybe that's the way to say it. And sometimes it can be difficult to feel that I've progressed very far. But I think if I were to set myself back as a child and look at what I've done, or even 5 years ago and look at what I've done, I can feel very proud and successful. It's on a spectrum. And it's not done. There's that saying, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And for whatever it's worth, I think the sentiment of that is worth it. Investing in the patience and time to see results, whatever those results may be.
That's beautifully said. And I think that's actually a really good piece of advice for people to think about, in terms of like, it may seem like no one's paying attention, and it may seem like your work or whatever you're doing is kind of, it hasn't become quote unquote successful, but actually you're right. Like, it takes time, and it has to be the right time. Like, timing is everything. But the right people have to see it, the right people have to share it, the right people have to understand it. So it's not just a case of, I'm going to create all this cool work and people are going to love it. It's like, you have to make sure, you have to give people a reason why they should be interested in what you do. You can't just create beautiful work.
Yeah, I'm entitled to no one's attention. Nobody is. And that is a big thing. It's like, well, then you have to make sure what you're saying is interesting, worth investing in, meaningful, exciting, resonant, special. I mean, there's a lot of, and that takes a lot of time to build. You're not the only one doing it. You're not the best one doing it. You, me. And so, yeah, it's just effort and time. And at the end of the day, there's nothing that, and you said it so beautifully earlier, that it's like, you live life on your terms. And if that's not success, then what is, I guess, we want the most, but I can settle for never compromising who I felt I was and what my purpose was in life. And that's not paying my bills, that sentiment, but operating with that is I think success on its own, in its way.
So can anybody be an artist?
I think yes, I do. And I think it's so important. So I'm of two minds. It's like, if you want to be, in an art career, doing art things, like truly in the truest sense, into galleries and museums, that's not necessarily just everyone, and not even necessarily all artists. Not everyone has. You have to be wildly dedicated. You have to be very diligent. You can be very talented, but if you're not working to put the work where it needs to be and making the work, you'll eliminate yourself. And there's never a promise anyway, even if you're doing all those things. But I think it's important, like, I've known so many people who are creative people, and my sister is a wonderful example. She's a vice principal now, but she's been a teacher for many years. she's an extremely creative person. But you go through, at least speaking for the American school system, there's a lot of emphasis on rendering as art. And I think it turns off the potential for people who are creative people or who could make art. Maybe it's just for themselves, but they feel like they're not good at it. So I always want to be cautious in saying it's like, if it's art, if you're making it, you know what I mean? But is it in the art world? I mean, there are layers and nuance to all of that, but I think it's important. I have a neighbor who's turning 80 this year who discovered painting in the last 5 years, and she's incredible. You know, like her art is unrivaled in its like earnestness and joy and freedom. And, you know, in her, you look at it and you really do know who she is. Hers is like, like her joy, her lived experience is all over it. And so imagine that, you know, when you're 75 to 80, you've discovered that you love painting. And so I think that saying everyone's an artist is important in that way. Is everyone exhibiting at Hirshhorn? No, but depends on what you want out of it, I guess.
That's a great answer. Because it's such a debatable topic. You know, it's like everyone has their own opinions. And it's not just a yes or no answer as well. That's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
So the second to last question, you'll be probably very glad to know, is...
No, I'm having the most fun. I hope you know that, Aaron.
I can never discern if people are or not. I feel like people are like, oh, I'm having fun, and they just see if you're like, get me out of it.
No.
I was like, there's kind of like a vaporwave aesthetic, or at least some kind of like early 2000s computer aesthetic to your work. Like, is that intentional? Okay, that's perfect by me. So the second to last question, the penultimate question, is what would your younger self think about your work? And what does your work say about you?
Yeah. Oh, that one almost like makes me want to cry. I think she would like it. Yeah. Yeah. I think that a younger me would be really proud of what I do. I think it I think I would just be really proud of the path I've walked, of like of like you know, who I am and what my values are and the work I make, and that I've stuck it out and fought to do it sometimes when it was hard. And the path could be winding, and like I said, spent a lot of time waiting tables and doing things like that. But yeah, I think I feel pretty good about it. Like I've done pretty good by that younger me. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
It was, what do you think your work says about you?
I hope that I think of myself as a very curious and open person. I feel like I'm open to all the answers, to all the lived experience. And I hope that when people look at the work, they can see that it's a little bit silly and maybe a little ham-fisted at times, but that it's also like deadly serious and, you know, deadly hopeful and deadly sad, and it's earnest and it's curious. And I hope that it's an appropriate, an honest perspective on the joy and grief and pain and gorgeousness of going through life as it is right here, right now, on the internet, together, alone, in the dark of infinity, if that's what happens when we die or not, you know, in joy and betrayal and internet and love and devils and memes and all of it. I hope it's rolled up into like almost like little candies. That's, I guess, what I hope. I don't know. That was a hard question.
That's really lovely. That's a lovely way to think about it, actually. That's super cool. And then the very last question, after like 15,000 hours now, the very last question, which is, well, technically a double barrel question, which is, what are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your work?
Ooh, okay. I'm currently working on finishing one piece. That's what I'll be doing today as we hang up. I'll have my lasagna, and then I'll have my drawing. I've got one piece currently with Wow Wow over in the UK. It's a digital exhibition, so the piece is here. The work is in cyberspace. I have 2 pieces. There's a gallery opening in Boston's Chinatown, and I've got 2 little pieces. I don't know. Is it worth holding them up? Is that like good for your? Okay, I don't know.
Cool for me, not for anybody else.
well, I didn't know if the photo quality would be whatever. But these 2 go together, and they'll be in Boston, Massachusetts. And then I've got this one I've held up a few times, but I've got sort of shimmery gloves that I need to finish rendering. This one is the piece that's about infinity, and it's going to a Gallery Ergo in Seattle. And the other gallery, I should have said, Blue Triangle Gallery. So I've got some group shows on deck, but people can always stay tuned on my Instagram or website. I try to keep lots of in progress pieces on Instagram on there all the time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll see. And don't know what's next. I actually need to go down and maybe after our talk, I'll be filming it, put together some new pieces. I've done everything that I've laid out for the first 4. So I've got to create something new. So maybe I'll be giving insights. Oh, we're like right on time. We're winding down.
Exactly. Yeah. So Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Like generally, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
It's been such a pleasure, Aaron. Really, these were fabulous questions.
That concludes the second and final part of my conversation, Sarah Jamison. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingthroughbowl@gmail.com. Get in touch via social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Through Bowl podcast can be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Music. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of those platforms to help spread the word. Also, please don't forget to check out theflyingthroughbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration, and if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. We now also have a Patreon page if you're interested in supporting the platform further. Tiers start from £1, and more information can be found over at patreon.com/theflyingthroughbowl. Additionally, if monthly donations are not your thing, we now also have a PayPal for one-time donations. I'll include a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to the episode today. Until next time, folks, please stay safe.